And I think looking back now, it's like, well, look, I mean, just the realization that I'm doing something that I don't want to do anymore. That was like the start of all of this.
But you're like, I'm going to do this job and then use it as a place to like learn, show people who I am, and then figure it out.
Frameworks driven and being able to kind of think in systems, I think was like a key skill that I developed. And I think those were kind of like the beginnings of me learning what it really means to scale, like how to grow at scale, right?
Sure.
All right. Welcome to another episode of What Worked. Today, we are very excited to have a guest here in person with us.
Yes.
Bentley Chang.
Special guest.
Extremely special guest. Bentley Chang, Vice President of Revenue Operations at ParkHub. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, pleasure to be here, guys. Let's talk about what worked and maybe a little bit about what didn't work.
You nailed it. That's the idea with this podcast. So appreciate you coming with your nuggets of wisdom and advice and guidance. We would typically try to introduce you, but we've fell flat on our face with introductions in the past. So there's no one that can introduce you like you can introduce you. So would you give us a brief intro, Bentley?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently Vice President of Revenue Operations at a company called ParkHub. What we do is parking technology for sports, entertainment, municipalities, pretty much any kind of paid parking scenario. We provide the hardware and the software and data analytics to business leaders, venue managers, city managers and planners, and so on and so forth. And so my specific part in that is really just leading the revenue operations org. We're a growth stage company, so it's a lot of project-based work, just laying the foundations, if you will. And that's just, an area that I found in my life that I feel really comfortable at. So,
yeah. And then real quick, just because I think the parking tech stuff, actually knowing a little bit about it, it's actually quite cool and quite in depth. So just walk us through a scenario though for a ParkHub actual customer. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm going to some type of event. How am I interacting with your technology?
So in Los Angeles, we have a couple of pretty big venues. We have Crypto.com Arena. We have Dodger Stadium. We've got the Forum in Inglewood, SoFi Stadium. So any event there, most likely, if you pull up in your car, there's an attendant that has a handheld, and that handheld is ours. So it processes every kind of transaction. It can validate prepaid parking passes, and it also feeds the parking volume information to a analytics dashboard. Mainly what we want to do is manage the ingress. So the traffic flow, we want to try to keep it as efficient as possible so it's not a burden to the surrounding area. Also, as a event attendee, you don't want to deal with parking, right? Like we just want to make that experience as forgettable as possible. So we just want to get you in, get you to the event, and then hopefully get you out as quickly as possible as well. That's kind of the name of the game.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about getting in and out of Dodger Stadium. That can be, it does suck. It does suck, but your tech helps it suck a little bit less, I feel like. So thank you, ParkHub. But there's only so much you guys can do. Los Angeles has done its best job to make that experience terrible.
we can't reroute the roads. And Elysian Park is what it is. Yeah. So it is really just kind of finding those little areas where we can speed things up a little bit and make it better.
Yeah, but very cool. Very necessary too.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a park.
Yep.
So Bentley, we're going to talk about what worked. So we know you're doing a ton of cool stuff at ParkHub today, but we want to take it back a little bit. And I think we talked about bringing it all the way back to your time starting with Cornerstone OnDemand. Is that where we landed?
When you said all the way back, I thought you were going to go birth, which you could do that.
We can go ancestral.
All the way back. Do you remember your birth? No?
Okay.
Yes, no, Cornerstone. Your corporate birth, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like that. There was before that, I was working in sales and really just kind of getting my footing. Cornerstone was definitely my first, not my first corporate job, but my first real corporate environment. Before that, I was working a lot of retail stuff. And so, what was really interesting about Cornerstone was it was my first SaaS experience. It was my first true like Monday to Friday job, fixed schedule, which was amazing. And also my first sales operations position. So kind of like the start of the journey that got me to, my current place, if you will.
How the heck did you get into sales ops? Because I feel like so sales, I would imagine did you start off in sales like the SDR? Like was that your first break into sales?
No, actually, my first sales job was at Verizon.
Okay.
So working at the retail store.
Yes.
I will say that I got incredible sales training at Verizon.
No way.
Like a full 4-week like classroom training program with the ability to practice with my peers and all that. It was actually a really incredible experience.
And a lot of repetitions, right? People coming into the store. I think that's super helpful, right? Like when people talk about, it's one of the hardest things when you start that first sales job. You're like, hey, let's role play.
Yeah.
And then you make like 4,000 dials. And you never actually talk to anybody.
It was a lot.
Yeah, and I think we have to note too, we're talking about an experience that probably some of the audience or listeners aren't familiar with. It's like we used to buy cell phones like in a store.
Yes.
And
they were dumb phones. They were not smartphones.
Yeah, they were not smart yet. So what year were we talking, like 2010 or something like that?
2008 I graduated.
Okay.
So,
iPhone.
Yeah. I mean it was like iPhone 3 or 4.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Blackberries were still a thing.
Yeah.
Not everybody had a
BBM.
smartphone. Yeah. Not even everybody had a phone. So there were instances where I was selling somebody their first cell phone.
Wild. You can call somebody wherever you are.
There's no cord.
Yeah.
Hey, there's no cord.
That's cool.
So that's where I cut my teeth in sales.
That's good. That's good training, though, it feels like.
Yeah, and then after that, I went to a couple different places. But Cornerstone was my first kind of like, I would say like industry, the way that we would describe that.
Tech, corporate,
Yeah, and so I started as an SDR at Cornerstone actually, after having done sales, carried a quota for about 4 or 5 years before that. So, I was working with a lot of, college grads. This was their first job.
Sure.
And so I did feel a lot more confident going into that position, but I still had to learn how to speak the language, the corporate lingo and how to adopt like a call script.
Right.
And, running a cadence through and through and all that. It was a different sale, different kind of motion for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so to answer your original question, how did I get into sales ops?
Yes.
So I had already known going into Cornerstone that I didn't want to continue my career in sales necessarily. It was like something that I was decently good at, but not something that I just felt like I wanted to do long term. And it was just like a personal lifestyle kind of decision. Nothing wrong with sales. I think to anybody that is thinking about what they want to do or might want to do and you're not too sure yet, I can guarantee you can benefit from any kind of sales training. So just want to put that out there.
Totally agree.
But what it was for me at the time was, I've been doing this for a while. I kind of wanted to do something a little bit more stable, right? But I hadn't figured out what that looked like yet. And so I had this opportunity to join this good company. And I just took that as an opportunity for me to create a lot of exposure to different types of work. I thought it was a good place to do that, a corporate office, international company. Specifically, what I was doing that caught the attention of the sales ops team was I was piloting this email outreach tool called ToutApp.
ToutApp. TOUTAPP.
That's right. Yes.
Oh my goodness. That's like the OG click open notifications.
That's right. Yeah.
And did it do like outreach, type of enablement? Was it sequences? I don't remember.
It had some of that. I think the bread and butter at the time was really around like open, recognizing when somebody has seen.
Oh, yes.
That was like all the craze.
Yes.
that takes us back.
That was such an unlock. And I feel bad for this generation of salespeople that they can't have that. That was such a beautiful thing. And like also like completely templated emails still worked. You could straight up, back then, you could just write, that's back when people write sales emails, and you would just say, this is what I do. Can we schedule some time? And that worked. You didn't have to do any crazy provide value. You're just like, this is all about my service. When are you available? Let's talk.
Right. Yeah.
The times have changed.
So you're exactly right. I mean, there's elements of that in today's tech, but back then it was a lot more straightforward. Right?
Totally.
And like everybody knew you were using something because it just, the way it came off was so robotic almost, But in any case, it was something that we really thought would benefit the team, and I got tasked with kind of running the pilot. So I was just reporting my findings back to the sales ops team, and I was pointing out a few things that I thought was strange. I was like, hey, I was clicking this thing, and I was going back to the contact record in Salesforce, and I noticed these values were changing. And they were like, oh, what is this? That's crazy. Then, like a few days later, they approached me. I was like, hey, have you ever considered working in sales ops?
That's awesome.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
You're freaking nuts. Like, you're no. Like, I have not, because, at the time, I knew nothing about that type of work, but it all seemed very foreign to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know how to use Excel. I was using Salesforce as an end user, but not doing any sort of admin work.
Right.
Things like automation, analytical, technical were just like words I didn't identify with, right? So I was pretty set on trying to pursue a career as a solutions engineer. I thought that was like a good way to step out of like being a quota carrier in that direct sense, but still, utilize my sales training and still sort of be adjacent to the process.
Right.
And so, this came out completely out of left field.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it happened specifically.
So you really just to kind of bring it back, you were thinking, okay, I kind of have like two roads ahead in terms of being a SDR, right? I could go the AE route, and then eventually be like maybe a sales manager, that type of thing. Or I could go be a solutions engineer, right? Which is as like still supporting, basically, you're directly supporting the sale, but you're just a little bit more involved in like the, obviously, designing the solution, working a little bit more with operations and that sort of thing. Yeah. But still you're sales adjacent. And now someone hits you and says, have you considered a career in sales ops? And you're like, sales who?
Yeah.
And did you have a little bit of like,
do you want to do something you know nothing about?
Totally. Well, that's what I was saying.
A lot of
Do you have
times,
a little bit of like imposter syndrome where you're like, I'm not like
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, I honestly, sometimes I still feel that way.
Yeah, we all do. That's
us too.
But here's the thing, I was just thinking like, look, I mean, this is something that someone who does this for a living saw in me. The potential to do something like this.
Yeah.
Maybe I ought to entertain it, right? Like, and this doesn't have to be some like lifelong decision. It's not like, oh, if I choose to do this, I'll never be able to go back and do anything else.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, whatever. Let's see where it goes, and I was very candid with the team, like, look, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, this is how I feel about doing something like this. And so I'm going to need a lot of help, right? I'm not the person that could just step in and provide value on day one. So if you guys are okay with showing me the ropes and teaching me how to do this thing, I'm a really good student. I'll try my best.
How much of what I think is super interesting about your experience, like how much, I think that's all very mature.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right?
That's
and
like,
how much
that's
of
rare.
that do you feel like is the fact that you didn't come in straight out of college to the SDR job? You had already worked as, a quota carrying rep at other companies. It all feels very like these things I think about myself when I first got out of college, or my first job. And I definitely didn't have that maturity. I couldn't really understand what was a great learning opportunity. And it seems like you were able to identify that.
You did two things that are very mature, I think, or like that really worked for you. One was like, you knew you didn't want to do sales, but you're like, I'm going to do this job and then use it as a place to like learn, show people who I am, and then figure it out versus just like, you didn't just like quit and like go work in a different industry or something like that, or a different field. So you did that. You kind of like stuck it out.
Right.
And then when you decided to take that step forward into sales ops, you kind of laid out your cards and said like who you are. It's like very vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's very mature, but it's also very like, I think as someone who like manages people, it's like very appreciated. Like in
Totally.
that, it's like I would take that as like a great sign. That's like you probably got off to a great start because you led with that.
Yeah, Mike and I always say the same thing when we talk about, you know, the whole like people management, is that when we have someone like yourself, I always say, I can do a lot with this person.
Yeah,
like I can
we
do
can
a
work
lot
with
with this this type of attitude, understanding, maturity. I can do a lot with this, and I feel like that's pretty rare. So that's amazing.
There's
that you
an
had
awareness there.
Well, thank you.
I'm gassing you up.
I would say that I had done all those things that I wasn't supposed to do years before, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you know, a bit of context, like before I went to Cornerstone, I had wrapped up a pretty challenging phase in my personal life where I was, you know, I had to be very vulnerable because it was just like a time where I was really confused. I had no direction. I was kind of lashing out, and you know, it led to just a lot of unnecessary, or maybe necessary. I got arrested a couple times. I was like, you know, really putting a lot of strain on my relationships with my family and like, you know, my friends and stuff like that. And so at some point, I was just sort of like, look, I mean, what the hell am I doing, right? Like, I need to just get my stuff together. You know, and it was a moment of clarity where I was like, I don't think I do many things very well, but there are a couple of things that I'm pretty good at.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that was the key to getting me out of that funk. It was just really leaning into my strengths. So I think, you know, it was more so just I wanted to show respect to the people that were recording me, right? Like I didn't want to come off as somebody that I was not.
Yeah.
And I think because this was like so far outside of my periphery that I couldn't even fake it if I wanted to, right? It was like, if I had been like interviewing for like the solutions engineer position or like something else, you know, like customer success, it's like, dude, like, yeah, I could probably talk my way around this, like, you know, however which way. But with sales op, I was just like, look, I mean, like, I know the term, that's about it, right? So, I didn't come looking for this. You guys saw something in me, and I'm really glad you did. And so I just really wanted to let you know, like, this is what we're getting into, right? Like both of us. So I think it was nothing more than that, honestly. Like I didn't see it as a mature thing to do, honestly. Like I just didn't want to let them down, you know? And I felt like beholden to some of the people that have been vouching for me as well, right? I mean, it's always a group effort, right? So like I had them at the forefront of my mind, and so that was that.
That's awesome. And I think like that's one of the things that a lot of people, speaking of like the whole experience thing, and then also your personal experiences, is that there is incredible power to, I think, like two things that you did. One is just leading with complete honesty and transparency, letting people know, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. And I that's one of those weird like career things. And I don't know where I learned that. Probably like blatantly like lying or like putting on a face about like, oh, I know how to do this. I learned somewhere like along with as going through my career to just like lead with like that open honesty. And I find that it immediately creates like connection. People are like, oh, like I want to teach you. It also just makes it infinitely easier because the person's like, okay, now I know exactly where we're starting. We're starting from zero. Yeah. So let's work from there. That's really cool. And then I also want to say that for anybody listening to this, Bentley has written about some of his personal things, which is like super, super powerful. I will say that one of the things I can really relate to is I think when you put yourself into a position where there kind of is no way, it's like you have to, like an impossible position kind of type deal. I think it brings a type of clarity that helps people tremendously in their career because it simplifies things.
Yes.
When I talk to people like they went to a really good school, they got a really good job out of college, they haven't faced like significant real life adversity. I think in a certain way, they're like handicapped to a certain extent because I think that it makes they have almost too many life options, if that makes sense. When you only have one option, you kind of, I think, act a certain way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that.
I do. I would say that like don't go looking for a hard time.
No, totally. Yeah,
Life is hard enough. Mm-hmm. I certainly didn't plan this in any way.
Yeah.
But I would say, like you don't really know what you're made of until you get thrown against the wall, right?
Yeah.
And there's nobody can help you, and you just got to figure it out. And I think in those moments, you just got to look at yourself and, figure out what it is that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, I kind of just tapped into this really like primal instinct where I was like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Like this isn't me. Like, I know how I got here, but like this can't be the way it just like ends.
Totally.
For me, right? Like things can't fall apart like this. I've got more to prove. I've got more to do. And I just got to like get past this thing. And so that just kind of goes back to like, well, what's going to carry me through this, right? Like, let's just, it's okay that I don't want to do sales anymore. In fact, at the time, there was just so much pressure to be like, well, what are you going to do, right?
Totally.
Like, and I think looking back now, it's like, well, look, I mean, just the realization that I'm doing something that I don't want to do anymore, that was like the start of all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like just being comfortable with that. And then it's like, okay, I don't have to jump off this ship right now, right? Like, I mean, it can carry me like past this. And am I even ready to take that next step? No, because I have no idea like where that step is. Like where am I going to place my feet? I had that opportunity to look at myself in that way.
Yeah.
And I would say to everyone else, like that moment will likely come if you don't feel like it's already hit you yet.
Yeah.
But I have the wisdom of hindsight to be able to say that now.
I think to bring it back full circle, and yes, anybody out there, you don't have to get arrested. You can figure it out without doing it, right?
Yes.
But what I would say is that another version of that is basically what you did with sales ops, right? You kind of threw yourself into the deep end of the pool.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
So how did you get your start there? And I mean, obviously, I know they approached you, right? So you decided to take the leap. But then going back to the very title of this, podcast, what worked? Like what worked and what didn't work in that experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, the learning curve was incredibly steep.
I bet.
For the first weeks, like I couldn't even keep up with the most basic conversations that were happening, like amongst my team. You know, like I didn't know what API stood for. And it was like an acronym that was getting thrown out all the time, right? Because it was like about platforms and integrations and all this stuff. It was like, oh, the API, blah, blah, blah. And before I could even open my mouth to ask, like, what is API? Like, I would forget the acronym.
Right. Yeah. I picture you going around the office being like, excuse me, I'm looking for the API. I was told to find it. It's been checking various closets. They're like, oh, that's a good joke, Bentley.
And my old peers were like, hey, I run into them in the hallway. And they're like, hey, how's everything going? How's the new gig? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm just sales opsing so hard. So it's so sales ops.
Yes.
So that's like where I was at.
Totally.
And it just seemed for like a long time, like nothing was working, right?
Yeah.
Like I was like, I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I just was mentally exhausted at the end of every day. And I wasn't even doing anything. I was just shadowing, right? Like, so I kind of just reminded myself like, hey, first of all, somebody who's really good at this sees potential in you. So just hang in there, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to feel like you have to contribute or anything. Like just be comfortable being uncomfortable, sit in the room, listen to the conversations, and just try to find something, something that works. And then I realized like, oh wow, this is like basically like a sales discovery process, right? Like this is prospecting 101, right?
Interesting.
Like you're calling on somebody, you have assumptions about what they're going through, but time after time, you're uncovering things that you didn't know about, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, what if I just kind of put my salesperson hat back on and just treated these interactions like I was trying to sell something, right?
Yeah, you're networking throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Who do I need information from?
That's
How do
right.
I find the bottlenecks?
Yeah.
And
That is a cool analogy. I like that.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about how you lean into your strengths in a moment of weakness or vulnerability, and you're doing it again here in this situation. You're like, I know sales. Let me lean into the frameworks I know. Discovery call framework. Okay, how can I apply this to this shadowing time that I have in sales ops?
Yeah. So it started
like that. Like the group conversations were one thing, but my one-on-ones with my manager and also with my peers, I did a lot of prep. Like I would just bust out this template that I had and just be like, okay, what's like the theme that I want to explore here, right? What's like one thing that I really want to learn about, and like what are some meaningful questions that I can ask, and so that's basically how I started to develop a template to understand this really vague and nebulous concept. And I hit a pretty big milestone when I learned how to do a VLOOKUP formula in Excel.
Yeah,
VLOOKUP guy.
So that worked.
Then now you're talking Mike's line.
Yeah, I'm more of an index match.
Yeah,
I'm more an index match guy.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, Tyler.
I'm big on Microsoft Word. You know about that? No, find and replace.
Yeah. So that was like okay. Now I learned something that is actually useful in my day to day.
That's cool.
And Excel was one of those things that I was really afraid of for like a really, really long time. Because I remember like in the past when I tried to use Excel, I didn't even know how to format cells, right? Like if I was putting a number in and like there were 2 decimals, I didn't know how to make those decimals go away, right? I didn't know how to like.
Yeah, I only learned this recently, so I'm laughing.
I'm imagining you like spending like 45 minutes trying to like move these 2 decimals.
No, the worst
over.
too is I'm sure this happened to you, because this happens to me still regularly with this guy and like everybody else. But it's like when you're not good at Excel, you do something and then you have someone like take a look at your worksheet and they just start doing stuff. And they start doing stuff without actually using like a cursor. And I'm like, right.
You know what else?
Yeah, well, clearly that's a better way to do that.
When
I was
they
just
do
testing
that,
you. Yeah.
Like when people who know Excel do that, and also they do like they're like they always end it with a.
Oh yeah.
Speaking
it's
from personal
like they're holding the 3 point over that and it's all bad. It's like, all right, Steph Curry, chill.
It's like a Steph Curry shimmy at the end of their format.
Totally.
Excel people.
Yeah. So I mean that's what worked, I suppose.
Yeah.
It was really just like a place for me to cut my teeth, honestly. And well, I will say, by the time I moved on from Cornerstone, I had gotten Salesforce certified. I was the dedicated business partner to the enterprise sales team. I was doing, not leading this on my own, but being the conduit to help them do annual territory planning. And I was still making a lot of mistakes. Like I remember I was on this call with like the head of the healthcare sales vertical trying to help him dole out accounts. And my boss had put together this Excel template for me, basically just to like work through, right? And I had instructions to be very specific in my actions. But I made some mistakes along the way and I tried to correct them. And then I was like deleting, formulas and messing up dependencies and this and that. And I didn't know how to undo those things. And so it was like a disastrous call. Like we spent like 20 minutes doing all this work and then we had to redo it. And then I messed up like 15 minutes later again. I had to redo it. And like, bless his heart, gosh, I wish I remembered his name.
Good guy though.
Good guy. And he was just like so cool about it. Didn't lose his shit. Didn't like.
This is gonna come up on his LinkedIn feed, and he's gonna tip the cap and be like, "You were pretty cool too."
He sounds like the guy that doesn't want to be named either. He wants to go
anonymous.
Unnamed. Know that he was there in that moment.
People like that donates and they don't make a big fuss about it. Same guy.
But I remember you.
Yeah. Respects. Props to you. Yeah.
So look, I mean, shout out to John Tran, who gave me the SDR gig and had the confidence to promote me and be a team lead under his team, and really kind of facilitated the transition to the sales ops team, which was under Dave McCandy's leadership at the time. And Dave kind of, I'd like to say he taught me everything that I know. He still taught me most of everything that I know. But I did have the opportunity to work with a lot of really great people after Cornerstone as well.
That's really cool.
That's really cool. I'll say like, in terms of like what worked, and as we're wrapping up this Cornerstone chapter in your career, we're talking a lot about like what worked for you, but also like flipping the table around a little bit. that one person that was like, hey, like you'd be really good at sales ops.
Yeah.
Just saying those words to someone.
Yes.
Like he or she opened up like a new world, a new career for you that's been very successful since then. And so do you guys ever think about just like the power of words of encouragement or like belief that you can have in people, especially Bentley, you're managing a large team today. Tyler, you too. So that's another thing a lesson that I take from this story.
Yeah, totally. And I actually just saw this video on LinkedIn. It was like a Toastmasters competition back in, I think, 2015 or something. This guy who won the category of speech, it was about the power of words. So very serendipitous for you to bring it up.
Yeah.
And I 100% believe in that. You know, like, I mean, everything makes a difference in the world. You know, like I'm of the mindset that like the whole butterfly effect thing is very real, right? I mean, I look back on times of my life and you don't realize it in the moment, but yeah, that was a huge inflection point in my career that it just came out of practically nothing.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And I don't even think this person, her name is Christina, by the way, Christina Gonzalez. I don't even think she was thinking about that. You know, she was leaving the team. And they needed to backfill her position. So I think she was just trying to do the team a solid by being like, hey, you know, this guy's cool, right? You guys like him.
He makes API jokes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like totally, you know, have all the appreciation in the world for her and the team, you know. That was a really good time in my life.
And let's be honest too, most operations people find sales people to be intolerable. You're probably just the most tolerable, right? That's the reality. She's probably like, hey guys, the rest of this team, we hate him, right? But this guy's pretty chill. So no, but in all seriousness, I think that those moments, I actually do think about this now a lot too. I'll like have a moment with like a direct report or even just someone that I know. And I'll recognize and I'll be like, whoa, just in the moment, I don't tend to think about butterfly effect, of course, like what this would have on the impact it would have on this person's career. But I do think a lot about the power of encouragement. And it's just one of those things where you just kind of forget that, like, it's like the basics, you know, it's like when you think about managing people or just, you know, supporting people, a lot of times you think about like, you get into the tactical stuff. You're like, all right, I got to teach Bentley how to do VLOOKUP and blah, 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 or whatever. When it's probably the most impactful stuff is just, you got to hit people with true, like unfettered and honest encouragement, which is different than, you know, kind of like I say honest, different than just like
gassing
people up for no reason. Yeah. Like, hey, you messed up that entire worksheet, Bentley, but like, dude, you're like doing a great job. It's like, no, it's just being like, hey, here's why we think you'd be good at this job. I think those words are extremely powerful. They stick with somebody. And it can have an impact for a very long time. But a lot of times I'll be having a conversation with direct report and then I'll leave and be like, whoa, I wonder if that was like a moment for them. You know, you just kind of stumble upon it. I always wonder that.
Yeah, I have moments like this in my past where people have said, like my history teacher in high school, there was a moment that I'll never forget. She like challenged me essentially. And I feel like that was like an inflection point for me going all the way back to high school. And people that don't even have a big part in your life, they just, certain words stick with you.
Yeah. Or that guy that your mentor from your shoe salesman days in Nordstrom who was like, oh yeah, hey dog, like come over here. Let me show you how to move these pumps.
Yeah. He's like,
this is how you get
he big bro'd me.
Yes.
And he showed me how to sell Jimmy Choos.
That was a moment. All right. So you are not at Cornerstone anymore.
Right.
Yes. So at some time, someplace you made a jump from there, but it does sound like Cornerstone was like a seminal experience for you. You kind of got your sales ops foundations, it feels like.
It was, yeah, it was exactly that, I think. So a couple things happened. My boss got promoted, and so we became one layer removed. And the person that backfilled his position had more of a project management background. And I was learning so much about the technical aspects of being a sales ops analyst, you know, like Salesforce experience, Excel experience. And when Dave got up, I kind of lost a little bit of that. You know, manager that stepped in was great in his own way, but I just felt like project management wasn't necessarily something that was benefiting my experience there at the time. So even though I learned a bunch, I felt like the learnings kind of tapered down. And after a while, it became very routine. I had an opportunity to join a startup company to essentially lead a nascent sales ops function, which I'm laughing now because I realized I was so underqualified to take that role.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I got the interview. I talked my way through it. I got the job. And I just figured like, oh, hey, I mean, I made it work at this like big global company, right? Like how hard can it be going to a small company? And I mean, it just slapped me across the face.
Startups are hard.
Tell us what you mean. You said nascent, like sales ops org. Like how large were you the sales ops? Or
you were the sales ops. I was hired number one on the sales ops side.
So tell us what company this was. Like, where were they in their maturity or their growth journey? How many people were on the sales team? Give us a little bit of context here.
Yeah, so the company's called MomentFeed. They are based in Santa Monica. And at the time, they were, I think, like a Series A company.
Which this is what year?
This was in like 2016.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. So this is like, at this point, Series A, like, I remember like in 2012, Series A was like $5 million. But at that point, Series A, they raised a decent chunk of cash.
Yeah, they...
at least $5 million.
I think they're... so they did it on the round while I was there, and I think they pulled down like about 14 million.
Okay.
So it was, it was lower than that, but when I joined. So anyways, I mean, it was, it was really hard. I felt like I knew nothing about anything going from Cornerstone to this startup.
And I was supposed to be the guy to turn MomentFeed into this well-oiled machine, and I was not the guy.
Yeah.
I was the guy that got the job, and it was so humbling because it was like the experience at Cornerstone learning how to do this thing all over again, which I did not expect, right? Like I almost had to unlearn everything that I learned at Cornerstone. Here's the thing, I mean, Cornerstone is a much more mature organization. They'd gone through so many more motions and they kind of arrived at their level of maturity through iterations. I didn't have that that kind of foresight when I went to MomentFeed, right? I just thought every challenge could be solved by doing it the way Cornerstone did it.
Right.
Wait, are we on the precipice of our first what didn't work?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, nothing worked in the beginning.
Yeah.
I had all this swagger walking into the situation, and I mean, at a small company, there's nobody to hide behind, right? I mean,
Totally.
I had never worked at a real startup before, and so I knew some things decently well, but I had no appreciation for the growing pains that companies had to go through. I was really heavy-handed with some of my solutioning in certain areas. I had complete non-answers for other things, and it all kind of just it went south very, very quickly, and I lost the confidence of my superiors probably like within a month or so. Like just everybody was openly, well, I don't know, it was like an open secret that like I wasn't gonna work out likely. Luckily, I had a lifeline there. I started to report to somebody named Michael Kang, who was just really gracious and recognizing that I was having a bit of a difficult time. And he actually put me on a PIP.
Pips can be really great.
Yeah.
Though, right? That's another form of encouragement, honestly.
Yeah, we're talking about those pivotal moments.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a PIP.
Yeah, and here's the thing that I really appreciate about Michael. He had the ability to be objective and critical without just like crushing my soul, you know? And I think I really needed that at the time. It was a mixture of, again, I felt like I had my back against the wall. I was like, man, I had worked so hard to even get to this place. And now it's all just like falling apart in front of my eyes, And it just got that spark again where I was like, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that I can't go down like this, So, and I was well beyond like, hey, let's treat this like a discovery call, right? It was like I had to do something new. So what really kind of helped me in that situation was just really questioning the utility of everything, right? Like a couple stumbles that I had in the beginning was I was trying to implement this like this way to measure time between sales stages through creating this, this like huge web of custom fields and formulas.
Oh gosh.
And it was like something that nobody asked for, right? Like nobody cared, right? Like the CRO didn't care.
Fall in love with the problem, right? But like basically no one was asking you to really solve that problem, but you just like basically, became so enthralled with it.
Yeah, because that was what was front and center at Cornerstone. It was like, hey, when you reach these milestones, these time frames, it's time to think about things differently.
It's like a signal.
It's time to question whether this is actually happening.
Right.
And so that was like one thing that jumped out to me that MomentFeed didn't have. It was like the ability to really track that stuff. And I thought like, man, we really got to be moving more towards that kind of a format, right? Well, it didn't matter one way or another. It didn't exist because it didn't matter. And so I was spending a lot of time trying to do things like that. And, Michael kind of like pulled me off to the side and he was like, look, like why are you even doing this? Right. You say we need to automate this thing, but why? Like what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve with this?
Sure.
And I was trying to explain to him, explain my thought process. And he was just like, okay, I mean, I understand, but that's not where we are. That's not helpful to us. Right. And in the beginning, I really took those words like personally, it's not helpful. I kind of translated that to like, you're not good at your job, right?
Totally. You heard it through a totally different filter.
Yeah, it was more of like a personal affront.
You heard maybe Bentley's not helpful to us. Right.
So, he decided to kind of take me under his wing. He really kind of met me with that level of candor that I had initially described about how I was talking to Cornerstone. He's like, I do see a lot of potential in you. We felt that way about you while you were interviewing. So I know there's something there. I think you just, you need to up your game. You need to be able to execute better. You need to be able to just kind of reframe your thought process around certain things and really see where we are as a company and meet that challenge head on. Stop trying to solve for hypotheticals. Stop trying to solve for these edge cases. And really, move us past these big roadblocks that are right in front of us.
Wow.
Right? And so I was like, okay, why do I feel like we need to automate stuff? Is that even like the right approach, right? In RevOps, it's like automation, efficiencies, and standardizing processes and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But there's a time and place for it, right? Those are some of the things that I started to really internalize, right? And then I realized, there's a name for this. It's called frameworks.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Let's start thinking more in frameworks, right?
Totally.
Themes, and not so much about the nitty gritty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like where does this fit ultimately in the bigger picture? And I think those were kind of like the beginnings of me learning like what it really means to scale, like how to grow at scale, right?
Sure.
Not so much, can you write a formula? Can you test it? But how does that help people? What are people supposed to do when they see this
I think
as an
that's
output?
super powerful because I feel like so often people think about scaling and they think about like, you nailed it. Like they're like, let's automate everything. But it's like, what actual problems are you solving for?
Correct.
And is it relevant to where we are today versus some gigantic Cornerstone size company?
And like, do we even know enough about the problem that exists to automate it? Because, like it needs to be repetitive enough. You need to be able to map out all the variables before you design something that just moves you through those processes, right? And I mean, like MomentFeed was a place where we're going from 0 to 1 constantly, right? So we didn't know these things well enough to build automation around it. And I was like, what Michael was able to kind of teach me, or that experience itself was able to teach me through, Michael was like a key person during that time in my life, but there were other really good people that I worked with that also was just like, in the beginning I was like, okay, you created this dashboard, but some of the components are kind of repetitive. I'm not really feeling like I can navigate my job better by looking at this thing, right? So I was like, okay, I get that. And then I was able to start having more constructive conversations. Well, what about this do you think doesn't work, or like, what would you do if you were me, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I am you way better, right? So let's just kind of like re-examine these things. So, it took a lot of hand-holding, but eventually I was able to put out a couple of things that were helpful to the team. And more, we just started to kind of box out from there, right? So really treated the go-to-market team as a modular component, starting with sales. The SDR function also needed a lot of work. And so, at a small company, obviously you wear a lot of hats, and I had that to contribute as well. So that kind of gave me a lifeline. Mentoring the team a bit, teaching them how to scale up their outbound, efforts, and then also creating the reports and the metrics to measure against that was also hugely beneficial to the team. So not necessarily what I considered like true sales ops or RevOps, but hey, I had it. Why not put it to work, right?
Yeah. No, I challenge that idea of like maybe not true sales ops. I think what's really interesting about sales ops in particular is that at different stages of a companies at different stages, sales ops means totally different things.
Correct.
So at the early stage, it means just like going from 0 to 1. And you don't need to build out these processes because they're going to break every couple months when the business grows and scales, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be really particular about what you focus on, and knowing that like that whatever you build is going to break at this point, and make those like kind of like ladder-like decisions. That's really interesting. I think what worked here for you was like you, or like with Mike's guidance, like you learned to think like outside of your function and more about like where the company was to, and to layer that on. Tyler and I talk about this all the time with Hireframe. We're actually talking about this right now. We have this ongoing conversation about, as Hireframe grows, we want to adopt more processes and more things that will scale. And we can pull those things from companies that are 1-2 steps ahead of us. But there's also the other side of things where sometimes like those can be hindrance.
Absolutely.
Those can be blockers for you if you go adopt a Microsoft's best practice for a company like Hireframe that's small and growing.
It's like we don't need we don't need a deal desk. It's like the deal desk is literally this desk. It's the two of us. But there's this tendency where you can be extremely reactive, where like you mentioned edge cases, it's like you have something happen, it's painful, and you're like, all right, from now on, like let's institute a 47-step qualification process for everything. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like when we look at, what I think we've gotten a lot better at, even probably in the last like 3 months, is just being very honest about, okay, like what do we really need right now? Yeah. What's holding us back right now? And how do we tackle that in a way that's not going to totally distract from everything else? Like we have to be able to execute fairly quickly, try something out, and just get to the next step.
That's right.
And I think that part's probably coming from you joined Cornerstone when they were well past that stage.
They were totally. Yeah.
You get to a place with your enterprise tech. Now all of a sudden, the shade of blue on the logo, you do your logo rebrand. That becomes a 27-week discussion for good reason, because that's where you're at. But when you're MomentFeed, I'm sure it was like, hey guys, we need more revenue. So we can get that next round of funding, right? So it's like, let's get that. How do we get that quicker?
Right. And that was the North Star, right? Yeah. Like everything we did was about driving valuation.
Totally.
And so that was something I didn't understand at the time, because Cornerstone was a public company.
Yeah.
They had their 15th year anniversary the first year that I joined, right? Yeah. So totally different beast. My thought process for solving problems at Cornerstone 100% involved, knowing I was going to get some sort of a budget to put towards buying something.
Right.
And at MomentFeed, I had like zero budget. Yeah. Like I couldn't even buy coffee, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it was just like my world got turned upside down. And I very quickly realized like, look, I mean, Cornerstone's a great company, but they're not the gold standard for everything best practice sales ops, right? In fact, I should probably put a lot of distance between what I was doing there and how I should do my job in the here and now, because it's just not, there's too many steps in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I guess that's what worked, right? I mean, it was reframing my thought process, being a lot more frameworks driven, and being able to kind of think in systems, I think was like a key skill that I developed during that time in my career.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I think about, two very, very different experiences. You went from big enterprise company, now in much later stages, now going to very early stage startup, right? And then where do you go from there? You kind of cut your teeth in two dramatically different things. What's the next step? What got your blood flowing in terms of the next adventure?
Yeah, so this one is interesting. After MomentFeed, I went to a private equity firm called Arrowroot Capital, and they were just up the street from the MomentFeed office. Essentially, this position was to be also a first of sorts. Arrowroot at the time was a relatively early fund, and they were specializing in growth stage, mostly SaaS, companies. Their portfolio of companies, it kind of just looked like a lot of MomentFeeds, like different industries, different products, but more or less around the same size, more or less experiencing some of those challenges. So So I was able to see some themes where it was like, okay, I could see myself kind of slotting in here and helping out these companies. But the scope and the scale of it was just enormous, right? Because now instead of working full-time for one company, I was working in a lot of different capacities for a lot of different companies all at the same time.
Wow.
I will say though, when I got this job, I was super excited. I was like, I really felt like I had made it in a way,
Well, yeah, that's pretty crazy. You think about like your first time someone said, hey, you'd be pretty good at sales ops. Then you go do it at a startup. But then now it's like, hey, you're so good at this. We're going to trust you now across a bunch of companies. That feels like your confidence is probably completely different for that job interview.
Yeah, it was nuts. I mean, I actually didn't even get the initial interview the first time.
Oh, wow. No way.
A recruiter reached out and they were like, just, sometimes you get that initial email and then like you respond and that's it, right?
Right.
So it was kind of like that in the beginning. And then I followed up after, like about a month and I got the, hey, some decisions are being made about the position. If anything changes, we'll reach back out. So they did eventually get me to come back and actually do the in-person interview. So I had, a phone interview with the hiring manager, Chuck Haling, was able to do the in-person interview with him. And I was sitting, I remember this date like very vividly. I was sitting in the waiting room. There's a pane of glass separating me and Chuck, and he's wrapping up another interview. And this person was just like super enthusiastic, like really kind of, I guess, trying to project, like, hey, we're having a good time here. I'm going to get this job. And I was just like, oh man, you're always just sort of like, dude, when you're up against someone.
That's a classic finance thing, by the way. Like in finance, like private equity banking, they like to have everyone interview on the same day.
Yeah.
And it creates this like competitive energy in the waiting room, in the conference rooms where they kind of like put you like they kind of hurdle cattle like that.
Yeah.
And so you actually have to talk to the other people that are interviewing for the same job.
Yeah.
So it's it reminds me of my finance days.
Or casting call experience. For like an actor.
Yeah, casting call. Exactly. You're walking down, you see everyone else.
Yeah. So there was that. And Chuck was great. He came out and greeted me. He's like, yeah, hey, finishing up. Or maybe it was after it ended, he was like, hey, I'm going to go freshen up real quick, but head on in. And then we get started. And I sit down, this is at 100 Wilshire on the 17th floor. It's the tallest building in Santa Monica. It's got like an incredible view of the ocean and stuff. And it's me and Chuck sitting on this long, like marble conference room table.
Yeah.
So
super stuffy.
Yeah.
And, so we get into it, right? And I'm talking, and Chuck's asked me some questions. Oh, I seen your resume. You did this and that. All these different platforms. Tell me about Gainsight. Like we have a couple companies in the portfolio that are asking about that. So I was like, oh yeah, I implemented Gainsight at MomentFeed. Started talking about like the nitty gritty. Like this is what we configured it to do and this and that. And I could just tell like I was losing Chuck a little bit. This is like fairly later in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Like this is probably like his sixth interview
like
of the day.
RevOps
He's got that
He's
like
not a sales
glazed
ops guy.
over. I've done like all these interviews. I'm exhausted.
He was a former head of sales, ascending to lead like essentially go to market as a function for the portfolio companies. And I was going to be the subject matter expert for RevOps nested under him.
And you guys are like the value creation team is what Arrowroot called it.
Yeah, Strategic Resources Group, SRG. But in industry terms today, I think VCT is like the value creation team is like the standard way to talk about it.
Got it.
So I was like, again, I really want this job, and so I was like, listen, Chuck, I'll say this about Gainsight though, you know, the problems that it's designed to solve are all basically process-related issues. And the ironic thing about that is, you know, if you knew how to solve those process-related issues, you probably don't need to buy the tool, right? Because the tool doesn't come out with the answers. It doesn't tell you how to make your business more efficient. It's a mechanism for doing that. You have to teach it how to be efficient, right? Which means you need to understand intimately the problems that are driving your inefficiencies.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I don't think I described
that's a great interview answer, honestly, though.
Yeah, I don't think I described it quite as clearly as I'm talking about it right now.
Hey, we weren't in the room. You nailed it. So I'm sure it was awesome.
But that was a turning point, right? And he kind of he sat back. He's like, you know, it's interesting. You know, I've interviewed a lot of people for this position, and they don't understand it. You know, and so I had a lot of confidence coming out of that interview that I basically got the job.
Amazing.
So I, you know, of course I had to meet everybody else at the firm. I had to get vetted, but eventually I got the job. And yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, I loved working at Arrowroot. The challenges weren't quite as stark this time around. I felt like it was more just the exposure element was really jarring.
Okay.
Right? Like there were so many different types of companies, and I was flying out all the time, meeting these different stakeholders, and they all had varying levels of experience in RevOps. You know, this is a time when it was still really hard to convince business leaders to make an investment in RevOps, right? Like they were getting this funding and thinking like, I need to get killer salespeople, right? Or I need to get a really good head of sales. RevOps is sort of like one of those things that we do when we get a little bit bigger, right? When we reach that first milestone or whatever. So they really kind of looked at me as like, okay, cool. I have this like, not like a free resource, right? It's structured into the deal, but like, here's this guy that can come in and do these things for us. So there was not a lot of resistance to working with me, but I still felt like different companies, because of what I represented, you know, they were a little tight-lipped, some of them. They didn't really want to be open about, you know, the issues that they were experiencing. And so a lot of the early challenges was just getting buy-in, right? Like, hey, like you don't have to see me as a threat. I'm here to help you, right? Like we're in this together, right? But also there were a lot of stakeholders I was working with that didn't really understand how to talk about RevOps in RevOps fashion, right? So, you know, it was hard to get clarity around what they expected from me, and also just, you know, recognizing that I was working with a group of people that had various levels of exposure to what I do.
Totally.
And it was challenging because I had this self-imposed pressure to be the expert, right? Like here I am.
Right.
I'm supposed to be the person that has the answers. So it shouldn't be on, I shouldn't put any of the onus of this on the people that I'm helping, right? So I was making a lot of assumptions in the beginning. You know, I was in those cases where people were maybe just having a hard time describing what they needed help with and what they expected of my engagements. I was just sort of like, okay, cool. You know, they're probably dealing with this. This is probably the way to deal with that. And this is likely what they need from me. And there was a lot of mismatched deliverables in the beginning, right? Because of that process that I had. So again, it was like, hey, why does it have to be like this? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with asking some questions just to get some clarity and make sure that we're aligned? I kind of developed this approach that I call define, align, and clarify. Right? It's like just to make sure I understand the gist of the conversation we just had, and I would just read my notes back to people. Right? And then let them kind of guide me through, like, oh yes, but you know, not quite. It's more like this. And I just found that by really focusing my efforts on that part of the conversation, not only did I get the clarity that I was looking for, but it was like a huge game changer in getting people to open up to me, right?
I bet, because they're like, you're listening.
Yeah,
and
you're leading with it.
Yeah, that's really smart.
What was it? What'd you call this? Define,
align, and clarify.
Define, align, and clarify.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I just started doing a lot of that. And it actually just made, first of all, the relationships got much better. It was a lot easier to talk to people.
Yeah.
Secondly, the solutioning process also got a lot easier because I found that by really leaning into some of these things and talking about them in detail, the solution just became really obvious, right?
Totally.
And I didn't really have to think much about like, well, there's a couple different ways to get there. Like, yeah, but this is like the most obvious one.
That
right?
makes sense.
How did it impact like execution? Your define, align,
And clarify
that this process that you take, did it have an impact? It had an impact on figuring out what the problems were, aligning on those things, but did it also have an impact on actually executing on the different projects?
Yes and no. So I was also just like a one-man show here at the firm, right? This is also part of the challenge was I had to operate as a strategic advisor. I also had to be a project manager. And in a lot of cases, I had to do the actual work.
Yeah.
Because these are small companies, they're lean, they don't really have an expertise or a focus on RevOps.
Mm-hmm.
So there were like maybe 20% of the companies I was working with had like a low-level systems admin that was tasked with doing RevOps related things.
Sure.
But I had to work with that person. And in a lot of instances, they didn't have that. So I was like meeting with the executive team, be like, hey, this is what the vision should look like for you guys, right? And then, oh, this is what it looks like in the next 6 months, right? It's these 3 projects. Oh, and I'm going to start working on project 1 tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it was just a lot of just like elevating that through the chain of command and then this is like this process times like 5 or 6 running simultaneously across different companies. So
yeah. Wow.
So it I guess to answer your question, Mike, like how it affected execution, it was more just me getting my ducks in a row,
That's a very cool experience. I also hear a lot of the threads of like what you were talking about before. Like you said earlier, you're always selling. So sales is a good skill to learn.
Yeah.
This define, align, clarify approach is like one that I think the best salespeople I've seen
100%
apply.
That's a classic sales approach.
I've seen Tyler do this. I see Tyler do this all day long. He's spending investing that time up front to get this work done. A lot of times you think you need to start getting to, you want to show like time to value is on your mind. You want to start doing something and finishing a project soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, you learned through some of those false starts that you got to make sure you're working on the right thing.
Yeah. And it's exactly that. I was time to value, right? Like it's expensive to have these meetings, and you start to realize these things when you work more and more with executive teams. They don't want to spend the time because they just feel like it could be better spent elsewhere, right? So even getting that was challenging. And then just feeling like, okay, if I have like 30 minutes with this person and I have to provide value, right?
Yeah.
But it really just, in time I learned that, well, me providing value starts with me understanding what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? And so I owe it to them to make sure that I have that as a takeaway before I even start talking about, this is how we fix the problem.
Totally. And I think to like look back on your 3, call it like different milestone kind of experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really do think that so much of what you've been using this entire time really is like stuff that you learned in sales. Right.
Yeah. It's super cool.
Yeah. Cause I think that, with Cornerstone, it sounded like really, you basically got really good at discovery. That's how I'd summarize it, is that you got really great at like uncovering, asking good questions, getting all the details, and before you start just going off and figuring out what you have to do, right? Then in MomentFeed, you obviously picked up, frameworks, which I think is really also very similar to a lot of things you learn in sales. In sales, you quickly learn to like identify with each opportunity, okay, what is like the framework for closing this opportunity? Because they're not all the same.
That's right.
For this one, I got to get buy-in from this committee of people. This is going to be, decision by committee. So I got to go one by one. This other one, it's all about speed and execution. If I can show this one person that I will move with the most urgency and I will execute, I'm going to get this deal done.
Yep.
And I feel like that being able to apply it. And then now with Arrowroot, I just feel like you, or previously rather, you really learned the value in getting that buy-in and alignment from step one. And how do you do that? You do that by, listening and then repeating it back, right? It's like by that you establish trust, and everybody's moving forward with it's like now you share that goal. That's like the classic move in sales, when you start hearing the prospect start saying we instead of I. They're like, we need to when we implement this, we need, and you're like, got it.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. And I think that's inspiring too, because so many people out there, Mike and I are having this conversation the other day. I really think that back in the day, I mean like 5-10 years ago, I think SDRs, probably about, I would say 70% of SDRs wanted to become an AE. That's what they were thinking for their career. And about 30% wanted to maybe do something else. I think like SE is probably a relevant one then.
Yeah.
I think it's flipped. I think now only about 30% of SDRs, that's my guess, want to become an actual quota-carrying sales rep. I think 70% want to do something else. So, like a career path like yours is super inspiring for someone out there that doesn't maybe know how to use Excel great, right? Maybe knows a little bit of Salesforce, but not enough to be dangerous. But, that's where I love the fact that you took everything you learned from being a quota-carrying sales rep and you still apply it. That stuff is hugely valuable.
Yeah, that's right. I really wholeheartedly believe that sales training is some of the most beneficial endeavors that anybody can do for themselves. It's life. I'm negotiating all the time, whether or not I realize it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I've not sold anything directly in a number of years, but working as a VP in RevOps today at ParkHub, I have to sell ideas to my superiors, right? And it's the same process. It's being able to describe the problem, understanding the problem, getting buy-in.
Totally.
Recognizing the dials and how to turn them appropriately at different stages of the process.
Yeah.
So, I'm really grateful that I had that early in my career. Everybody says this, it's so cliche, the whole, like, if I can do it, you definitely can.
Yeah.
And it's not like that. I think I'm just taking a second to look back and appreciate the fact that, when I started this process, nowhere in my life did I think I would end up as some sort of subject matter expert in revenue operations, right? Like that's just I didn't think I'd be VP of anything anywhere.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really my goal, to be honest with you, right? Like my motivations were much more simple. I just wanted to be like a normal, upstanding person in society. And this just happened to be things that I picked up along the way, that I think, like, I had a bit of a plan, sure, but it wasn't so rigid. It wasn't so well-defined.
Yeah.
And I think if I had followed that plan to the T, I probably would have failed.
Sure.
Right? Because there were things that I thought I should be doing that it wasn't helping. Right.
Yeah.
And so, anyways.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap.
Yes.
We talked, I think, wrapping on that point about how important sales skills are throughout your career and your personal life, you even mentioned. So that's a great way to wrap. Bentley, where can people find you?
Yeah.
Tyler mentioned earlier
on
you post some great posts on LinkedIn. If people want to reach out, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn's probably the best place. I don't do social media too much anymore these days.
But when you do it really well. I have to say, your posts are like must read from me. They're really, really good. Very honest, very insightful.
I'd say
anybody who's on LinkedIn, which should be everybody, you should check out Bentley's profile. I don't know, what is it? You follow them on LinkedIn.
Yeah, probably like
all the above.
We'll link it in the show notes. And and we'll have to follow up on this conversation, Bentley, and talk in depth about ParkHub at some point, because we want to know what you're working on today.
Yeah.
But we'll have to do it another time.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
The next one.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.